Okay, now this is continued on the Worthy Lamb. This is parts 3 of 4 for our first Wednesday night on the Worthy Lamb, which is part of the Ultimate Kingdom series that we're doing. John is in the spirit, and his conscious contact with the physical world is in a state of suspension as he now sees events from the throne of God. He is impressed that the throne of God is in the center of all things. It had no beginning, and all life proceeds from it, because it is the origin of all things. God is the Alpha and Omega, the ultimate allness of everything. How can we realize the awesomeness of God who speaks this universe into existence? Our minds cannot comprehend his allness, because the finite natural mind cannot comprehend God. Likewise, the rainbow around the throne signifies this is a God who makes a covenant that can be depended upon as unchanging. Everything that God reveals to John must be understood in the historical framework from which John saw it. Keep in mind that John understood Judaism and Jewish history, and that God used the symbolism of that day in order to be understood by a persecuted church. That is why John was very familiar with a heavenly tabernacle he saw, because it was fashioned after the earthly tabernacle that God instructed Moses to build. God's description of the tabernacle given to Moses was a foreshadowing or a first fruit of what John saw as a universal tabernacle. The center of the earthly tabernacle was the Holy of Holies, within which was the Ark of the Covenant, Ark of God, containing the commandments that God had given to show his people he is a covenant God. The Ark also contained Aaron's rod, showing that God recognized him as the head of the priesthood. The commandments, Moses' recognition of authority, and the rod, Aaron's recognition of authority, were both in the Holy of Holies. In front of the ark was the curtain, and outside the curtain was the incense that was to go up before God. The showbread was on one side, and the candlesticks on the other. In the heavenly vision, everything which had been symbolic in the earthly tabernacle had now taken on a living form. Instead of incense, the praise of the 24 elders ascended before God. Instead of the ark, we see the throne of God, with the veil torn apart by Jesus Christ, who sits at God's right hand. As a Jewish man, John said, "Why, here is everything that Moses knew in the earthly tabernacle, but it is now lifted to a higher dimension!" Exclamation mark. The difference between the tabernacle and John's vision was like the difference between an architect's drawing and the actual. So I'm going to read that again right there. The difference between the tabernacle and John's vision was like the difference between an architect's drawing and the actual finished building. What John saw was easily related to what he knew already, but what was difficult for him to communicate were those things that were new to him. Before the throne are the 24 elders, and again the numbers are important only as they project ideas. As we saw before, 3 times 4 equals 12, which is a term of completion. There were 12 tribes in the Old Testament and 12 apostles in the New Testament, and when added together, they equal 24, which represents the totality of God's church. Whether the number of the church be 20 and 4 or 20 and 4 trillion does not change the truth of the eternal nowness of the presence of the church before God. I'm excited that I am already there. I am already, and he puts an exclamation mark there, I am already before the throne of God, and I am seated with Christ at the right hand of the Father. I already rule and reign with Christ. God's throne room is conscious of what takes place at our churches and in our lives. Aren't you glad? ? Indeed, we are seated in heavenly places with Christ. God views the church as inseparable from Christ. Therefore, we are with him in heavenly places. Previously, when I taught the book of Revelation, the writer says, I was troubled to think that Jesus Christ would return to Jerusalem's man-made temple where sacrifices would again be offered. I know now that I simply misunderstood that statement. Sacrifices will never again be necessary because this would make void the ultimate sacrifice Jesus Christ made for us by his death on the cross. In the spirit, I understand that truth, but in the flesh, I accepted that scripture for what it